You see the headlines every single day, right? The political division, the social unrest. It feels relentless. But what if the real danger isn't just about our society, but about our actual wallets? Today, we're asking a pretty serious question. Is our society a ticking financial time bomb? Let's get into it.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. That sounds a little dramatic. I mean, we're used to political fights and social tension. It's just part of the background noise. But what if it's way more than just noise? What if all those arguments could genuinely trigger a full-blown financial crisis? It's a shocking idea for sure, but it's one we really need to take seriously.
And yeah, it turns out the answer, according to a growing mountain of evidence, is a big, flashing yes. This isn't just a hypothetical theory anymore. These deep social cracks are now being seen as a systemic financial risk. And what that means is they have the power to bring down the entire economic system, just like a housing bubble or a massive banking collapse.
So how in the world does this even happen? Well, it all starts with three major fractures that are, cracking the very foundation of our society. Think of these as the root causes of the entire problem.
First up, you've got systemic inequality. I mean, just look at this stat. In the US, the top 10% of households now hold nearly 70% of all the wealth. That kind of gap naturally creates a lot of tension. And that tension, it pours right into the second force, political polarization. It turns debates about how to share resources into total gridlock, which is exactly what we see in those nerve-wracking debt ceiling crises. And all this is happening while the third force, eroding trust, gets worse. When fewer than half the people in advanced economies even trust their government, well, the whole system starts to lose its anchor. These three things aren't just happening at the same time. They're converging into a perfect storm.
So when these three forces, inequality, polarization, and low trust, all mix together, they create this thing that researchers call social fragmentation. Now, this right here is the key concept you need to grasp. It's that moment when a society loses its ability to agree on basic facts, to cooperate on big problems, and to believe in its own institutions. This fragmentation, it's the bridge. It's the exact mechanism that turns all that social anger into a tangible, dangerous financial risk.
Okay, so we've got this social poison, but how does it actually seep into the financial system? Let's trace the path of this financial contagion.
Well, it works like a really dangerous feedback loop. As you can see here, it kicks off with the causes we just talked about: inequality, polarization, and eroding trust. That creates social fragmentation, which then starts to attack the weak points in our economy. And the end result? Major, systemic risks to the entire financial system. It's a pretty clear and, honestly, a pretty scary chain reaction.
And that pressure flows through three really critical channels. The first is fiscal stress. Think about it. When politicians can't agree on anything, managing the national budget becomes chaotic, and that seriously dials up the risk of a country actually defaulting on its debt. Then there's banking fragility. Trust is literally the only thing holding the banking system together. When that vanishes, people get scared and pull their money out, sparking bank runs that can topple even major institutions. And finally, you get institutional breakdown. This is where political fights start to weaken the referees, like central banks and regulators, which makes them less able to step in and stop a crisis before it gets out of control.
And listen, if you think this all sounds a bit theoretical, history shows us it's a very real pattern. Just look back to 1789 France. Extreme inequality led directly to a total fiscal collapse. Or Mexico in the 90s, where political turmoil and inequality sparked massive capital flight and a currency crisis. More recently, you've got the US debt ceiling fights, which were driven almost entirely by polarization and put the whole global financial system on edge. And what's happening in Lebanon right now? A complete and total breakdown of trust has caused their entire banking system to basically melt down. I mean, the pattern is undeniable.
So this map gives us a snapshot of where different countries are today. Over in the high resilience corner, you've got places like Sweden and Germany with low inequality and high trust. On the complete opposite end, in the high stress zone, you find countries like South Africa and Brazil, which are battling both high inequality and low trust. But look at that middle category, emerging risk. That's where you find the USA and India. These are countries with, moderate inequality but declining trust, and that puts them in a really precarious spot. So, with all that in mind, where do we go from here? It really feels like we're standing at a crossroads, with three very, very different futures ahead of us.
The first path is what you could call baseline continuity. That's where we just kind of drift along, letting stability slowly and gradually erode, a slow bleed. The second path is the fragmentation shock. This is the big one. A sudden, violent crisis where social unrest finally pulls the trigger on a systemic financial meltdown. But thankfully, there's a third path, a much more hopeful one: resilience and reform. This is where we proactively decide to tackle these problems head-on, through inclusive growth and by actually rebuilding our institutions.
And let's be really clear about the difference between the worst-case and best-case scenarios here. The fragmentation shock path. That leads to government defaults, bank runs, and a crisis that could spread globally, making what happened in Argentina or Greece look small. By contrast, the resilience and reform path leads to stronger financial defenses, way less systemic risk, and crucially, a restoration of trust in our core economic institutions. The stakes really could not be higher.
So, this isn't about predicting the future with a crystal ball. It's about understanding that the future is a direct result of the choices we are making right now. So how do we make sure we choose the right path?
And that really gets to the absolute heart of it. If there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this quote right here. You simply cannot solve this problem with clever financial tricks alone. Real lasting financial stability can only be built on a strong foundation of social cohesion, growth that includes everyone, and institutions that people actually trust and believe in.
So, I'll leave you with this question. As you look at the world around you, at your own country, what do you see? Are we actively building the social foundations we need to be resilient? Or are we just crossing our fingers and waiting for the shock to hit an already fractured system? That's the question we all have to answer. Thanks for joining me.